Hello, I'm Bob Harris. Welcome to Durman's educational video series. In this video series, we're going to be talking about and ultimately showing you the Uberdek system, which is an exterior concrete resurfacing system. As part of the system, we have Param FP, which is their feather patch. So, for example, if your concrete substrate had some chips, gouges, falls, divots, we would go in and then we would start by fixing all of those depressions with the FP system. Once that dried for 3 hours or so, depending on the ambient and substrate temperatures, we would come back and we would use the CP1000 system, which is the primer system. You would prime the surface, and typically 1 to 2 hours of dry time, and then you're ready to go back over the top with the Uberdek. So in terms of the Uberdek, if you see here in this bag, it's offered in a white base and a gray base, okay? And why that's important is, as part of the system, if you choose to color it, you can color either the white base or the gray base with color fast coloring pigment. And so this is an example. If you see right here, this says color fast and it says gray base. So these are all of the colors that are offered to tint or pigment the Uberdek. And if you turn this color chart over, you can see right here color fast, and this is what the colors will look like in a white base. So it gives you a lot of versatility and many different options for coloring. In addition, once you've applied the Uberdek and it's cured for the appropriate amount of time, you have a couple of options to further color that system. You can use what's called aqua color, which is a water-based coloring tint, basically, or you could use a Pellucid Dye, is solvent-based, and this is what the color chart would look like for the Pellucid Dye. It just really depends on your dry times. If you're needing a quick turnaround, obviously you would want to use the solvent-based. If time is not an issue, you have much more control or greater flexibility using the water-based system. So that's how the system works. Once all of your coloring is done and you've had sufficient cure time, you're ultimately going to come over it with the deck guard right here, which is a methacrylate sealer. It's solvent-based and it has silane in it too for water repellency. So it's an excellent option, and in this video series we're going to be showing you some different textures that you can achieve, such as a simple broom finish. Not all the time does it have to be architectural or decorative, when in fact you can just give a facelift to the concrete simply by brooming the system. We're also going to show you how to do a traditional spray down over a stencil with a hopper gun, and then we're going to show you some basic techniques for taping out a design and troweling over the tape design. So you'll have some versatility in this video series. Let's show you how it works. As previously discussed, as part of the Uberdek system, what you need to do is you need to address any spalls and divots, and we'll talk about how to address your contraction joints as well. Now, we've already prepped these patches that you see right here, these two spalls, but I see a lot of installers, they don't do the necessary preparatory work for adhesion. And so what I like to do is I like to use what's called a Nylox wheel, which the name basically says it itself. This is nylon bristles. Don't use a steel wire brush, because that's going to transfer metallic powder and be a bond breaker. So the Nylox wheel is great for completely cleaning that out. And again, we've already cleaned it and vacuumed it, so normally you would vacuum right then. The next thing I like to do is SSD, the patch, which stands for saturated surface dry. Just dampen it. In extreme conditions, say for example it's very dry, you haven't had any rain for days, it's not a bad idea to go ahead and just take a small little brush and prime it with CP1000. But for today's application, this is perfect, just to SSD the patch. So we're taking our Param FP, which stands for feather patch. On a small application like this, we're just going to hand mix, since it's such a small amount. That's about all we need. If you were doing multiple patches over a large area, and some installers even will do a whole skim coat with the FP, certainly you would want to use a mixing drill, power drill to mix. So we're going to go ahead and put us a little water in here. It mixes with water. You're mixing it to a little bit thinner consistency than, say, peanut butter. There we go. So to show you what we're looking like with the consistency, again, just a little bit thinner than peanut butter. Make sure there are no clumps, and then you're ready to go right onto your patch. Now for the smaller little patch here, I'm just going to use the smaller trowel here, smaller margin trowel. So you always want to pay attention to your substrate prior to putting the Uberdek down. We'll let this dry, and then what we'll do is we'll come back in probably about 45 minutes because we're outside and it's warm and the sun's beating down on this, and we'll take the edge of our trowel and we'll scrape over the top of the patch to make sure it's flush. And then we'll vacuum that residual, and once it's dry, we move on to the next step, which is to put down CP1000 as a bonding primer. To recap where we are on our Uberdek installation, previously what we did is we prepped the surface, cleaned the surface. If you remember, we came over and we repaired these spalls with the FP, which is the feather patch, so that they're dry. Douglas has scraped them flush and we vacuumed them up. We've also filled the contraction joints right here with the feather patch, and now it's time to move on to applying the CP1000, which is an acrylic bonding agent. So a couple of observations. Use a chip brush or a paintbrush for the corners, and then here for the smaller application, all we're going to do is we're going to dip and roll. You don't want the material puddled, but go ahead and just put a nice uniform layer. The reason for this is it's serving a couple of functions. Number one, we're trying to seal off the porosity of the concrete. Right now it's overcast and it's not real hot, but if we were to put the Uberdek directly over hot concrete, we would have no working time. So by priming the surface first, in essence sealing off the capillaries of the concrete, it's enabling us some additional working time, but also for adhesion. So the CP1000 is going to absorb down into the porosity of the concrete, and then once dry, about an hour to 2 hours, when we put the Uberdek down, that's then going to stick to the primed surface. So it's serving multiple functions. A couple of other observations, as I mentioned earlier in the video, we've had a lot of rain, and so things are not wanting to stick to the damp walls, but you really need to protect your surrounding areas. So in a future video, we're going to be demonstrating textures using the Uberdek. We'll want to make sure and mask off the building and any of your surrounding areas so we don't contaminate it. So we're going to get busy putting down the CP1000. I'll start in the corners here. Okay. Yep, you can go ahead. On a larger job, it's actually okay to put the material in a pump-up sprayer and spray it down while one person quickly back rolls. But since we don't have the walls masked or the building masked due to moisture, we're going to go ahead and just take our time and roll on the CP1000. Yeah, exactly. All right, we're getting ready to mix and ultimately install our Uberdek. We're going to start with a gray base, and then we're going to put 6 to 6.5 quarts of clean water into here. Couple things for mixing. If you chill your water or cool your water, it's going to extend the working time. So oftentimes what we'll do is we'll use chilled or iced water for the mix. Once we put our 6 quarts in there, we're going to go ahead and use the Color Fast color to pigment. And the color that we're using is Mesa Verde Tan. We're going to put 1 cup per bag of 50 pounds of Uberdek. You can go up to 2 cups, but really there's no reason to exceed 2 cups because it's reached its saturation in terms of the pigment load. So Douglas is going to get started putting his 6 quarts of water in. Anytime you're working with a cement-based product, it is really important to protect yourself with a mask. So while we're mixing, we're going to go ahead and at least put our masks on, and then we'll talk about some installation processes after. One last thing, once we've mixed everything, we like to have what's called an induction period. Generally, we'll let it sit for 2 minutes after we've mixed, and it allows all of the cement grains and particles to fully saturate and absorb the water. And then if we need to alter the water, we go ahead and mix it one more time, and that extends the working time as well. All right, so we've now mixed the Color Fast into our 6 quarts of water, and we're going to start with our 50 pounds of Uberdek gray. It is a good idea to have a spatula or a margin trowel to keep the sides clean as you're mixing. You don't want the material to accumulate on the side of the bucket. Because of the heat, we're going to go ahead and take advantage of our 0.5 water, so let's put some water in here. Yep. There you go. All right, we're going to give it a solid 3 minutes of mixing. Now we're just going to take a chill pill and let it set for about 2 minutes to induct, and then we're going to give it a spin, and at that point, if we need to put a teeny bit of water in there, that's going to extend the working time, so we'll just let it set for 2 minutes. All right, we've waited our 2 minutes now, and we've got a good mix. Douglas put literally only about 3 ounces more water in there, and so we've got a good workable mix. So now it's time to go ahead and show you some application techniques. Now, for the purpose of this educational video, we're going to show you a couple ways that installers choose to put it down. We always want to do the edges first and then blend in the field area, and you can do that either by using a hand trowel, a magic trowel, and we're going to show you also, for educational purposes, a rubber squeegee. So let's get over here and get going on this. Let me use that right there. Okay, we just installed roughly a little over 300 square feet of the Uberdek tinted with the Color Fast coloring pigment. And that's it. Tomorrow we'll let it cure, and then cure until tomorrow. We'll just give it a light sanding. We'll vacuum that and then go to the next step. We'll talk about different applications in terms of final texturing with the Uberdek as well. Here's another texturing option when using the Uberdek resurfacing system for exterior concrete, is you can use a paper stencil. Stencils typically come in 3-foot lengths, and there's a wide variety of different patterns. This is an example of the stencil in a roll, and you simply have your team roll it out and overlap it. Oftentimes we're asked, how do you adhere the stencil This is a non-adhesive stencil. They do make adhesive back stencils, but for the non-adhesive, we just took little pieces of putty about the size of a grain of rice, roll it in your fingers, and you just take it under your finger, lift the stencil up, stick it down. That's it. So the stencil needs to lie as flat as possible. So we're getting ready to mix the Uberdek. We're gonna, just to recap, we base coated with Uberdek gray. Now we're going with Uberdek white over the stencil. And then tomorrow we'll show you some coloring techniques. We're going to spray it down with a hopper gun. And what's really important is that you spray straight down. It's really, really important that you spray straight down. If you spray at an angle, it has a tendency to go up underneath the stencil. So we're going to get busy mixing the white Uberdek. Keep going, come on. There you go, good. As an option, some installers prefer to produce what's called a knockdown finish, and that's just taking a trowel, running it in one direction, and you're just simply trying to smooth the tops of it. For this pattern, it's really not necessary, but notice how I'm going in one direction only. I'm not trying to go back and forth. And that's real nice texture for around pool decks or something like that, where you need it flatter. Okay, we just completed our spray stencil using Uberdek with the white, and we'll let that fully cure out, and we'll come, before we lift the stencil off, we'll go ahead and color it and remove the stencil, see what that looks like, and then we'll get it sealed up to complete this project. The Pellucid Dye is an excellent alternative for coloring both exterior or interior concrete. It comes in the concentrated form like you see here in this can. There's a wide variety of colors that you can look at on the Durman website for color selections, and this container mixes into 1 gallon of acetone. So it is a solvent-based product. It is UV stable. You can use this in a wide variety of applications. It's always going to be spray applied, and then once you get the material down, you're going to want to seal it in to lock that in. So this has some opacity to it. So for example, if you had an exterior patio or a pool deck and you wanted to change the color, this would be a great candidate. Oftentimes artisans use it as well for accenting their stains. So I've seen scenarios where guys will put an acid stain down, for example, clean and neutralize that, but they want some shading or some different values of color, and this is a great product for that as well. So we'll be using this on polymer cements, and if you wanted to change the color of an interior floor, say a self-leveling overlay, for example, perhaps you had some smoother lines or some color variation, this would be an excellent alternative to unify that color. We're getting ready to apply our Pellucid Dye. We mixed terracotta to approximately 1.5 gallons of acetone. That's going to give you more of an opaque color. If you want some variation or transparency, go ahead and thin it more with acetone, say 2 or 3 gallons of acetone to the 1 concentrated color. A word of caution, so we have the stencil. We did not do a knockdown finish for the purpose of this video. If you're topically staining over a knockdown or a spray down finish like we have here, it's a good idea to lightly scrape any of the little nibs. And the reason for that is if we come back and put a color And then those nibs that are accepting the color or the raised spots, over time, if vehicular traffic would remove that, you would have a white. So it is an important aspect to scrape the surface first, blow that off, and then put your coloring down, okay? So we're using a solvent-resistant sprayer, as you can see here, that's specifically for acetone. Right there it says acetone, and it's a non-drip, but still, you can see I always have the tip in something like a container or a rag in this case. So we're just gonna go ahead and lightly mist over the surface. You don't wanna puddle this on, you wanna fog it on. The goal is to not have it bleed or wick up underneath the stencil where the stencil's raised in locations. Keep in mind, this stencil sat overnight and we got a little bit of a rain, and the rain absorbed into the paper and kind of shrunk it. So you'll see some of it is a little bit raised. So application techniques are important. Inspire. There's our application of the Pellucid Dye. Basically, it's terracotta solvent based. And so we're going to give this probably 10 to 15 minutes just to make sure that some of the dye that's accumulated on top of the paper stencil is in fact dry. And then we're going to remove the stencil and see what we end up with. That's crazy, right? You keep going, I'm going to get this tape. We're back out on our Uberdek cementitious topping, in which we use paper stencil to create this, this really cool grid. And we used the solvent-based Pellucid Dye in terracotta color. Now we're getting ready to apply our Deck Guard methacrylate sealer that has silane in it for repellency. We're going to put this down at about 300 to 350 square feet per coat per gallon. And we're going to spray it down. Because of the dye, we don't want to bleed the dye, but you can roll this material. Just keep in mind, whatever it is you're rolling over, you don't want it to bleed the dye. In this case, that's why we're spraying it. So you always want to try to seal in the coolest part of the day, in the AM, in the morning, before the direct sunlight is on the surface. When you seal in the hottest part of the day, unfortunately, like we are today, you get a chance, or it's prone to outgassing from the trapped air in the concrete being displaced and comes back up through the sealer, and that's a direct result of temperature. So you never want to seal a concrete surface if the temperatures are exceeding, the concrete temperatures are exceeding 85, 90 degrees. That's getting way, way too warm, and you can expect bubbling. So